Hello crafters, I'm Yana Smakula. Welcome back to my channel where I share handmade card ideas, tips, tricks, and techniques to help you be inspired and make beautiful handmade cards. In this video, I'll show you how you can combine watercolor and hot foil stamping to create colorful hot foiled backgrounds and watercolor foiled accents for your handmade cards. We will need to use some sort of watercolor paper for this technique. I've tried various kinds of watercolor paper and they all seem to work really well. The only type of watercolor paper I haven't tested is rough watercolor paper. This is the kind that has the most texture, so I can't speak as to how well the rough watercolor paper will foil. Here I have the Fun Stampers Journey Color Splash sheets. These are 140-pound cold press watercolor sheets, and I find they work really well for hot foil stamping. I like how thick these are and how well they hold the water. This paper does have a little bit of texture, but it does foil perfectly. I also have a Jane Davenport canvas journal. These watercolor sheets are 120-pound, so a little bit thinner, but this paper also works really well for hot foiling. It does have a bit more texture compared to the Fun Stampers Journey paper, but also foils beautifully. The Jane Davenport paper has a little bit of a yellow tint to it, while the Fun Stampers Journey watercolor sheets are really nice, bright white, and that's what I like the most about them. That being said, I encourage you to use whatever watercolor paper you have in your stash. I probably wouldn't use anything too expensive or too fancy for this, as we will be making just easy abstract backgrounds. I personally would not use my Arches watercolor paper, as I have that for special projects where I really take the time to do my watercolor. I will be using the Mini Media Mat from Waffle Flower as my work surface to do the watercoloring. This is a wonderful mat to work with different mediums. It's a silicone mat, and this mini size is simply perfect to create backgrounds for A2 cards. I like to use it for ink blending and other messy techniques in my craft room. As for my watercolor mediums, I'm going to use these markers from Jane Davenport and Spellbinders. These are Mermaid markers, and they are highly pigmented, dye-based watercolor markers in easy-to-use water brush marker format. The colors in these are very vibrant, and a drop of ink goes a long way. I'm also going to use a water brush, so just an empty brush filled with water, and I'll use that to move the watercolor on my paper. I have several size water brushes here, all from Jane Davenport. If you don't have a water brush like this, you can use a regular paintbrush and just dip it in water to help move the ink on your surface. Another watercolor medium I will be using are Jane's Inkredible inks. These are similar to the Mermaid markers, and you can use them straight from the bottle or fill your empty brush pen with, or you can mix these to create custom colors. Just like the Mermaid markers, these are very vibrant and they do stain. You can see I already have a little bit of ink on my fingers, and by the time I'll be done with my backgrounds, my fingers are going to be all covered in ink. But I don't mind. It's all the beauty of the crafting process. That being said, again, I encourage you to use the watercolor medium you already have in your stash to make these backgrounds. The idea is to have fun and simply play with your supplies. Do not stress, do not overthink, do not try to make it perfect. Okay, let's get started. I like to spray the paper with water first to help the ink move on the paper. I'm spraying my paper off camera as I don't want to get my background all wet and messy. Wetting the paper will also dilute the watercolor, and the watercolor will be less vibrant on the paper. You can keep your paper dry, but you will end up having harsh lines in much more vibrant colors. So that's completely up to you. I'm going to make a few ombre backgrounds first. Here, I'm adding a few drops of ink from the Byron Bay marker onto the paper and using my brush to spread the ink and move it to the other side of the panel. Next, I'm using a clear water brush and moving the ink some more to create that ombre look. It's extremely easy to do, and ombre backgrounds always look simply stunning. add hot foil stamping on top, and you have yourself a showstopper. My trick for drying these backgrounds is to use my Glimmer hot foil system. As weird as that sounds, I like to use my Glimmer in various ways, and drying wet backgrounds on the surface of the platform works remarkably well. I make sure to add a piece of scrap paper to the hot foil platform to prevent the ink from the paper that I'm about to dry from getting onto the platform. Next, I add my inked panel, I cover that with another piece of scrap paper, and then place my shims on top. I can also put something else heavy to apply pressure. This not only helps to dry the background, but also helps to keep it really nice and flat. And the backgrounds end up being dry in just under 5 minutes. I'm going to make a few more ombre backgrounds like that first one. For the second one, I'm using the Siren Mermaid marker and mixing it up with a Byron Bay color. And for the third background, I'm using the Blue Bottle color marker. And as you can see, these are very vibrant, beautiful colors. I'm going to show you how I made a few more backgrounds using these watercolor markers. I really got carried away and I used the entire pack of watercolor sheets to make these backgrounds. I was planning to make extras so that I could not only foil the background border strips on these panels, but also use the panels to hot foil little accents for my projects, such as sentiment panels, leaves, and flowers. At some point, I switched to a slightly different method of applying the ink. I sprayed the silicone mat with water instead of spraying the paper. Next, I added a few drops of ink and simply pressed my watercolor panel into the water and dye ink mix. This gave me beautiful faded backgrounds. These ended up being a lot less vibrant compared to the previous backgrounds I made. By the time I was done, I had really made quite a mess, and you can see how dirty my hands have gotten from all that ink. But it didn't matter because I had loads of fun making these backgrounds. I ended up not using all of the backgrounds. I saved some for future projects, and I honestly could not wait to turn them into pretty cards. Okay, next comes the most fascinating part, the hot foil stamping. I'm going to use the 4 background border Glimmer plates from Spellbinders to foil my backgrounds. This first one is called Twinkle Lights and it measures 6 by 2.5 inches. This plate is easy to extend to foil a full card background, and here's an example of that where I foiled it twice in gold to create a dainty dot background for this card. This blade would also be fantastic for winter and Christmas cards as it can add falling snow. Just foil this in light blue or maybe silver foil and you have yourself stunning falling snow on a card. I look forward to using this blade for my Christmas cards this year. The next one is Modern Lines, and this one also measures 6 inches by 2.5 inches, and it is also easy to continue to foil a full card background. Here's the card I made earlier where I foiled this plate twice and watercolored over the hot foil stamping. And here are 2 more examples where this plate was just foiled in gold on white cardstock to make a beautiful modern background. Love it. The next one is hand-drawn wave, and this one is my favorite. The size of this is the same, 6 inches by 2.5 inches. This one isn't as easy to continue to cover the entire card front, but it is still a versatile and elegant plate. I like to foil it twice like I did on this card for an almost full background, or hot foil it 3 times and cut the waves out like I did here for a true full card background, and I'll show you how to make this exact card today. Last but not least is the woven Glimmer hot foil plate. This one is the hardest to stretch to make a full A2 card background, and I like to use it to add just a foiled strip to the card. Okay, let's get some foiling done, shall we? I'm going to start by foiling the hand-drawn wave Glimmer hot foil plate on one of my watercolor ombre backgrounds. I will actually foil this plate on all 3 ombre backgrounds that I just showed you. I like to tape the plate to the paper using washi tape. This ensures that the plate will stay in place and will not move, but this is not as important here. I will later skip using the washi tape and will just foil without it as it doesn't make that big of a difference for this particular background. Now, if you're new to hot foil stamping, I encourage you to check out my hot foil stamping tips video for several key tips and tricks when it comes to foiling. I then cut my foil. I like to use the Fun Stamper's Journey Grand Pro shears to cut the foil. These are really, really sharp. They just slice right through the foil without jamming it. I really like these scissors. I add my foil to the background, I add the plate over it, and then use another piece of washi tape to tape everything in place. Next, I've placed the paper with the plate on my Glimmer machine. I press the timer button, and next I'm adding my shims. First, I have the thin shim. Next, adding a piece of cardstock. This isn't necessary, but something I like to add to my machine to increase the pressure. And then I'm adding the spacer pad. You'll notice that my plates are all covered in bits of foil. I am a messy crafter, and this is how I typically foil. It doesn't bother me, and I never mind. But if you would like to keep your Glimmer plates clean, you can use the Undo Sticker Remover or a similar product to remove the foil from your plates. Just make sure not to scrape the foil off, as that might scratch your plates and consecutively scratch the foil when you do your foiling. The light has stopped flashing on my machine, and so it is time to take the platform out of the docking station and send it through my die cutting machine to apply pressure and foil. I'm using the Spellbinders Deep Sea die cutting machine, but Glimmer is compatible with many die cutting machines on the market. You want to make sure to go slow, go forward and back, and bring your platform to the docking station and dock it so that it remains hot and you can keep foiling. And voila! Look how excellently this turned out. I love the look of gold foil on watercolor backgrounds. It is simply stunning. I foiled this background 2 more times, each on ombre watercolor background I had made previously. And it had foiled perfectly on each one of them. I did get a bit of overfoiling on the last one, but I was able to clean that up using a dry paintbrush without any problems. Overfoiling is normal and might happen if there's too much pressure applied. Here, the overfoiling happened where I had the washi tape. There was too much pressure, and so too much foil transferred onto the paper. I set this background plate to foil again, this time on pink watercolor background, and while the machine was doing its thing, I started cutting the wave background out with scissors. I like to use my Tonic spring cut scissors for any fussy cutting. These scissors are easy to use, and my hand doesn't get nearly as tired as when I use regular scissors. I used not to pay attention to the scissors I was using in the past, but then again, my hand never hurt in the past. Now it does hurt at times, so I'm trying to make sure that I always use the best tools out there to help minimize or ease that pain. Now here's what this background looks like foiled on pink background. I think that is stunning. Once again, no surprise there. I love all of them. For the pink background, I'm going to foil this plate twice, coming in from the top and bottom of the panel, just like so. And look how beautiful this turned out. I never get tired of foiling, and I think it looks beautiful on so many different surfaces. Okay, let's go ahead and put a few cards together. I didn't film how I made all of the cards that I'm sharing today. I was actually making my cards during a power outage that we had a couple of days ago. And because we had no power, I couldn't film, I couldn't foil anything else. I just used what I had already foiled previously to make these cards. To create the cards with the ombre hand-drawn foiled waves, I cut 2 of the backgrounds out and then adhered the 3 backgrounds directly onto an A2 white side-folding card base using glue to create one stunning background. I then used my scissors and cut the excess paper off. Next, having made the background, I foiled sentiment and several accents for this card. The sentiment reads, "Happy Birthday," and it comes from my Yana's Foiled Basics sentiment set. The circle frame is from the foliage border set, and so is the flower. The little leaves are from the organic foliage set, and all of these plates come from my Foiled Basics Hot Foil Plates collection with Spellbinders. I foiled them all in gold foil on the same watercolor cardstock, and I cut them out with the help of coordinating dies. I do have a video showing my Foiled Basics collection. different ways to use it, as well as many project ideas if you'd like more inspiration. It is linked right here and also in the description below. At the beginning of this video, I showed you how to make a watercolor background first and foil later. You can also go the other way around and you can foil your image first and watercolor it later. This is what I'm doing to add color to these foiled die cuts. I've used the Davenport Byron Bay Mermaid marker. I added a bit of color onto my media mat from Waffle Flower. I added a drop of water from my water brush to dilute the color, and next used the water brush to bring the color to my foiled elements to color. This gives me a more controlled, less vibrant, much more softer watercolored look. I love how foil, similarly to heat embossing, resists the watercolor, and the watercolor can pull next to the foiled lines, creating beautiful, one-of-a-kind effect. I really do hope that you will try to combine hot foil and watercolor. These seem like two totally different mediums, but when mixed together, they work oh so incredibly well together. I left the pieces to dry, and next I used a mix of foam adhesive squares and glue to add them to my card. I foam mounted the sentiment circle over the background. Next I used glue and adhered the foliage framing the sentiment. Finally, I added a flower using another foam square to add dimension. I added fashion gold embellishments from Fun Stamper's Journey to complete this card. I actually added those embellishments to all of the cards that I'm sharing today, as I think these fashion gold dots go perfectly well with the gold foiling. Now here's another card I made. I kept the background free from watercolor, and I just foiled the beautiful Twinkle Lights plate. Next, I foiled a frame from the Geometric Floral Frame set, and then a beautiful sentiment from the June 2020 Glimmer Hot Foil Kit of the Month from Spellbinders on one of my watercolor backgrounds. I cut the frame out using scissors, and next trimmed one side of the frame using my paper trimmer so that I could dock the frame to the left side of my card for an offset look. I foam mounted the frame onto the card, and then to dress it up, I added additional foliage and flowers that were foiled on watercolor backgrounds I had made earlier. I really think these dainty leaves and flowers add a lot to the card design, and they help complete the card. Here's another card where I used the same floral elements to dress up a sentiment panel. I kept this card pretty much monochromatic. Now let's have a look at all of the cards I made, shall we? I had an absolute blast first making these watercolor backgrounds with the Mermaid markers and Inkredible ink from Davenport, and then foiling all sorts of different backgrounds and trying different combinations of foiling to make these cards. I hope you found this video useful and inspiring, and you will give this idea a try. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and do hit that bell icon to be notified about every new upload. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys. I'll see you next time.